Good morning. And we are the Varlins, and this is our official refrigerator card. And there are extra copies out, tables on both sides on your way out. In fact, there are tables set up emphasizing missions this week, neighbor kind of in the international context, and with a specific focus on Africa, hence the African flags up here. Free Methodist World Missions active, I think, in 26 countries in Africa. The core, or at least the legacy, really around Burundi and Rwanda. If you don't know where they are, get out your maps this afternoon and get a little geography lesson. And also Congo kind of pulling in there, but spread out a number of ways, or a number of countries around the continent. But a couple of things besides our card, which you can grab. We're going to be at this table. I think the Millers are going to man the table on this side. But there's a World Missions prayer calendar for November that you can pick up. I know November doesn't start till next week, but you can have it ready. And also just to highlight one of our own, Erin Kingsley, if you know her, has grown up in the church here, and she's getting ready to go to Hungary. Now that doesn't qualify as Africa, but she's one of our own here who's getting ready to launch. You can pick up her card and pray for her. But we're under Free Methodist World Missions, under their Visa program, their volunteer, but we serve at Rift Valley Academy, which is run by Africa Inland Mission, which is long-time mission board operating in Africa, about 500 missionaries scattered around. But one thing they do is operate Rift Valley Academy, a boarding school for about 500 children, missionary children. And just for comparison, most of those students are in the high school, 300 of them, so a graduating class is about 75. If you're trying to imagine, well, how big is this school? That's probably somewhat similar to a lot of the smaller schools in the county here. But the students, if we look at their passports, they represent somewhere between 25 and 30 different countries. In other words, where their parents are from. But all of them are in Africa now, so their countries where they're located in Africa are also in the 20s somewhere. But they represent more than 80 different mission organizations. So even though the school primarily, is there to support the children within Africa in the mission, this vast number of other mission agencies take advantage of the school and send their children there. They come for 3 months at a time, live there, and then go home for a month, home being wherever their parents are, and spend extended time with them. So we run, in a sense, kind of three terms, and we're supposed to be there right now. But the virus has messed things up, and we're teaching online, not Zooming, or anything synchronous, because our students have many of them have scattered hither and yon around the globe. In my U.S. history class, I have students in California and in Seoul, Korea, and everywhere in between, going the long way around the globe, not just hopping across the Pacific. So I've got a 16-hour time difference and deadlines when students can turn things in and so forth. So it makes it a little interesting, but we're getting along. We had to do it last year to finish, started this year, but our plan is hopefully to return after Christmas. The glide path is headed that way, all the planning. Numbers look good in Kenya right now as far as schools reopening there. It's not just us. The country shut down all schools in Kenya, and they're hoping to restart soon here. So we, again, teach, but it being a boarding school with the students living there, it's not like we teach and then we go home and have another life. We are school 24/7. We will go back and start at the beginning of January, and it'll be nonstop till the end of March, because once classes are done, then we're involved with all kinds of other activities, just about everything you can think of. Of course, full-blown sports program and arts and music and theater and all kinds of outreach and class activities. We were senior sponsors last year for Reed's class. Reed finished last year, and Sid is a senior this year, which means we'll kind of be winding down our time at RVA. We'll be coming back here to Spring Arbor. I'll sign up for Medicare, and I'm not sure what's next. I'm doing some dreaming, but it'll be a kind of starting a new chapter for us. We were at Spring Arbor for a long time. Deb and I both teaching at university and kind of took early retirement, and this is our 5th year on this kind of stint there, but we had done 3 one-year things. At first, God has kind of been working slowly on us. The first time was 30 years ago. We went out for a year, kind of try it out. It was a great year, and 10 years later got the itch to go back, and that's when we met the boys, and they joined us. And then 13 and 14, we were back for another year, and Deb said, okay, this is it. No more commuting. We're going to stay. So we went in the fall of 16. We went over on our 5th of 5 years right now. Not saying, we're not sure we're done completely. We may end up going back short term, but there's nothing being planned right now. For those of you who don't know, the rest of our family, we have 2 older children. Our son Luke, just finishing up graduate studies and moved to Minneapolis on Labor Day, kind of starting new things there. And Grace is in Seattle, doing some more of her theater work that she's done for a long time. So we have children spread over a long period. I think Deb and I were talking the other day, we've had some student in K through 12 for 30 years now or something like that. So it's time to be done. But the school, again, is very international. On one hand, if you walked onto campus, you would feel like you're in a Christian school here back in the States. I mean, it's an American curriculum, and a lot of those, other activities, and teachers loving on students and so on. The difference is that it's boarding and very international. The majority of kids probably have American passports, but they've grown up, many of them spent their lives in Africa. And then probably, actually after that chunk, 20% of our students are Koreans. The Korean church, if you know anything about global Christianity, has kind of exploded post-Korean War, post-World War II. I mean, the church growth has just been phenomenal in Korea. And out of that have come this tsunami of missionaries that are all over the world. And when they come to Africa, many of them have said, they would like to have their children take advantage of an English-based education. Learning English, becoming bilingual, seen as very much an advantage. So we have a large number of Korean students, and then students again from scattered from all over. So these are the flags, just part of them, representing the home country of the students. And then just one quick shot on our students being neighbors, just like students would do here, get involved in youth group and do outreach things. This was a clothing delivery to a church down in the valley, which I'll explain in more detail in just a moment. But collected used clothing, from missionaries, and when guests come and visit, they'll often bring extra clothing. And then on this one day, we loaded up the school bus and took it on down and shared it with people who are, don't have very full closets often. I mean, there are plenty of people who have one set of clothes and maybe one spare. And so this helps go a long way. But going along in the theme of who's my neighbor, I have 2 stories to illustrate that we have connected with, or at least have some connection with, there in Kenya. And then I have one more kind of theoretical illustration at the end. But this is Church Under the Tree. And the context here is in 2007, Kenya experienced nasty election violence after the election. I mean, there was tension building up, and when the election happened, the losing side wouldn't accept the results, claimed all kinds of fraud and so on. And the country erupted, basically along tribal lines. Brief history, Kenya was tribal until the British came at the beginning of the 20th century, and then they drew a line around it and said, okay, now you're all Kenyans. Well, the country has been working on nation building, but underneath that is still tribal allegiance. And if you scratch too deep or poke too hard, some of that bubbles to the surface. And it did after the election. And so people got pretty brutal and decided to deliver past grievances on their neighbors, unfortunately. Over 1,000 people died in riots and other kinds of violence. But tens of thousands of people were displaced. They were uprooted. They were living in the wrong part of town, so to speak. Maybe over a couple past generations, they'd moved to a different part of the country. Things have been fine, but all of a sudden now, oh, you're not one of us. You're out of here. So people were moving around the country trying to find a place where they accepted. Just down the hill from the school was an open piece of land, and the government said to one group of people, okay, you can come and squat here until things quiet down. The school, being right up the hill, said, okay, we will help and try to do some Band-Aid things here to get you through. But the real story here is one of the staff members, one of the Kenyan staff members at the school, ran our arcade and the office, really felt a burden on his heart to minister to these people. Not just, provide, food and shelter, but really care for their souls. And so he went down and started preaching under this tree. And on a hot Kenyan day, a tree is a welcome, shelter to kind of break up the sun. And a church was born. And this picture is more recent. This isn't, the first church. You can actually see the building in the background there. That's their church building now. But John also then felt compelled to start attending Bible school. And so right near, Rift Valley is a Bible college run by African lineage. So he started through, picking away at it part-time because he's still working full-time for RVA, trying to get this church going and do Bible school on the side. But he persevered, and this is now a very solid congregation that is doing well. They have not only, if you measure, they've got a building, and they've got Sunday school classrooms, and growing numbers. And he's made a real impact in the community, not just presenting the gospel, but really caring for all kinds of people's needs, including orphans. And John is John's a great support raiser. He knows how to kind of connect with us missionaries and really pull on our heartstrings. And one time we were down visiting, we actually met two little kids. They were about 2 and 3 at the time, maybe even younger. And their mother had just died, and their father's an alcoholic who shows up, John said, maybe once a week. And these kids were destitute. They didn't have anything. And so for the next few years, we covered their what they call their preschool fees. It was, a place they could go during the day, get some decent clothes and food, and kind of nurture them along. But John, again, just isn't in the pulpit. He's got his fingers on the pulse of the community, touching everybody and then connecting resources. He knows how to, again, get in people's hearts and their pockets and pull things together. And so it's been a great example, I think, of success in being a neighbor in this context. This is their congregation, by the way. One day when we were down visiting, trying to squeeze people in for a group portrait. But another interesting story that comes out of the local area, another friend from RVA was in IT, some kind of vice president somewhere, a mover and shaker, and they had 2 children, and then they had a 3rd child born with serious birth defects, complications, and died a couple days later. It broke their family. Not that the family fell apart. The family was just heartbroken, though. And Steve especially felt like it was time for some kind of reset. He had become a Christian as an adult and was still growing in his faith, but felt God was calling him to something different. They ended up at RVA. And one of his funny stories, he came as an IT administrator. Can I serve? And they said, sure, teach junior high English. And he looks back on that and saying, what did God call me to? But obviously God was calling him to greater things. So they were dorm parents, did a variety of things. But one day he went to visit a local school, a local government school, walked in and found children sleeping on their desks during the lesson. They're just leaning over, sleeping. And he asked the teacher, why do you let children sleep in class? And she said, we understand. They haven't eaten in a couple days and they can't stay awake. And more probing to find out the food situation in many of these families. They're all subsistence farmers. So when there's a decent crop, people can eat. But if a crop goes bad, you just starve. And you try to maybe get a little food during the week. But if you don't have enough food, not only can you not stay awake in school, you can't learn. I think most of you understand the connection between reasonable nutrition and learning. And so he was just broken and felt moved to do something. And since he's a go-getter, he dreamt up this plan to start providing meals to these schools. And he also tapped into people back home, got into their wallets and said, hey, we got to do this, and started this program called Kenya Kids Can. You can find them online if you're interested. They're now providing more than 15,000 lunches a day in area schools, within kind of a couple-hour radius of RVA, which is where he was. The program is developed, and obviously there's ongoing funding. You're always trying to do that, but he's turned over the program to local people. He kind of sits in the background, makes sure all the paperwork and things happen. But he's got local directors on the ground running not only feeding one reasonable meal at lunch every day, but then he's also started some computer centers at many of the schools. Figured out a way to take a shipping container, makes a good secure place, put solar panels on the outside and put laptops inside, train local teachers, and expose these students who are resource poor, they're at the bottom of the barrel, give them a chance, expose them to the skills they're going to need to survive in the 21st century. Keyboarding, how does a computer, basically operate? And again, these schools don't have internet connections, but at least if they have some time on a machine and they go on and they know how to type, they can have a chance at going on in school and starting to break the cycle of poverty. Steve was also concerned in doing this balance between helping and causing dependency. And one of the big debates in aid programs, of course, is how do you help people without, getting them dependent on some kind of system. And he has worked hard to make sure that this is focused on children, giving them a bridge to success, not, feeding families, so to speak. Not that feeding families is a bad thing, but long term, it can, disrupt the local economy and so forth. But this really seems to be something that's on target as a way to help these children, give them a chance to step out of their situation and move forward in life. So again, two examples, I think, of people who have connected, answering that question, who's my neighbor, in a broader context. Now, one other short kind of thought piece illustration, trying to answer this question of who's my neighbor. And I grew up hearing the story of the Good Samaritan over and over and over again, and it wasn't until, actually, I think I was teaching one time here at Spring Arbor, and I sat down and pushed through it a little bit more and became fascinated with the way that Jesus constructed the story. And key for me is the characters are assigned roles. I think, there's a man going down a road, and two of his buddies walk by. In other words, these are people, they are the same people. You should help your people. This was not a stranger situation, an other. Somebody should have known. And Jesus kind of pokes the finger, these are people who should have known better. These are people who are high up in the social order. They should have been able to do that. So people helping their own. No, he has an outsider come in and help. And that's the real digger in that story. It's not like there's a bad guy in the ditch and the good guy comes along and helps him. Kind of pat on the back, oh, you did a nice job. He really sticks it to him. He says, hey, the good guy's in the ditch and the bad guy is the one who steps out. The person who had all the reason in the world to walk by and ignore. And it really stuck home to me. And its idea of the neighbor is, and I think I've seen some T-shirts or posters more recently, this long list of others. When it comes to answering who is my neighbor, it's usually the one that we would least likely connect with. It's easy to help somebody who's in your circle, and that's how I want you to think here for a minute about this idea of difference and relating to people who are different from us. Okay, concentric circles, several rings, kind of like a target. Put yourself in the middle. And as the rings go out, we're getting farther away from who we are. So more difference further out. The people on this outer ring are the most different from you. And we put it into sectors, we could kind of look at different ways that people are different. Maybe language, maybe economics, maybe religion, maybe family structure. Any number of ways to say, well, that person's a little different from me. Now, close by, these are the people we relate to easiest. They are the ones with our common experience. kind of live like us, same beliefs, whatever. When we're out, we say, oh, that's a little bit iffy. We get out here, we maybe don't even understand people like that. We don't know where they're coming from. And I think the challenge is to try to move out here, get out and get to know people are different, not just drive by and point sometime. I think, one of the times my eyes were opened and I moved in the circle was shortly after we were married. We were attending church downtown, First United Methodist. They had a work group, went down into Appalachia for a week to do home repair. And I ended up with a couple of people inside a trailer putting up drywall and some insulation to try to help these people stay warm during the winter. And the trailer was, I don't know if I'd say the trailer was nasty, but it wasn't very nice. It was very different than anything I grew up with, or very different from the way any of my friends lived. It was a different world. In, maybe small letters, it was a cross-cultural experience. But it wasn't like I drove down the road and saw the trailer. Said, oh, okay, that's a trailer. I've never lived in a trailer. That must be different. Okay. But to be in that trailer, talking to those people for a week, really changed my perspective. It dug deeper. It's been the same way in Kenya. A couple times, gone down and visited people in Kenya, walk into a mud and stick home, people who have a couple of pots, and there's maybe one kind of strung together bed in the corner where everybody sleeps, and there are a few clothes in one corner. That changes the way you think about the world, experiencing those things. So here's my challenge. In trying to continue to define who's my neighbor, that you push yourself out into, beyond that comfortable circle. Here, this is the easy part. It's easy to love people that you get along with. I think Scripture even talks about that somewhere. The people you don't get along with, for any number of reasons, or you find it awkward to deal with, those are the edges. I think the growth edges of our faith. And so I would just encourage you to that question really is burned in my brain, my heart hopefully, is who is my neighbor and how do I answer that? And so that Jesus can be more clearly, reflected off of me or seen through me. Sometimes I think I'm a mirror reflecting Jesus. Sometimes I'm a window that hopefully people can see. But either way, I want it to be clear that people can really see Jesus in my response to that question, who is my neighbor? And we're going to tag.
Hey, y'all. Whoa. We work with a number of people who are from Texas, so that's one thing I've learned in Kenya, is the proper way to greet. I had to show a slide in the gym since I'm a PE teacher. But actually, I want to begin with what God is doing in Africa by sharing briefly about what are called UPGs, unreached people groups. And the technical definition of a UPG is a defined group of people who are less than 2% evangelical Christian. And then, of course, you have to define evangelical Christian, which I'm not going to this morning. But perhaps you're imagining folks living in a remote village in Madagascar, which would be accurate, and we do have friends serving there. But I want to share a couple of creative examples of how missions is evolving. Bryant and Lauren opened First Power CrossFit Gym in Nairobi in 2017. Their motto is igniting a life-changing, uplifting, energizing fire in Kenya. Their second child just graduated from RVA in Reed's class, and their third child is currently a junior. Urban Nairobi is a great place to plant seeds for the gospel. Our good friends Janet and Mike saw a need for evangelism in the expatriate community in Kenya. The result is Old Africa magazine, Stories from East Africa's Past. Old Africa is building bridges and connecting with the white Kenyan community, many of whom have lived in Kenya for generations. Think of Out of Africa. People contribute old photos and tell stories of their families, and that allows those people come to Mike and Janet, and they build relationships, they get to hear their stories, and again, these are both examples of growing relationships for the gospel. Catherine DeHike Doherty wrote, "The hunger for God can only be satisfied by a love that is face-to-face, person to person. It's only in the eyes of another that we can find the icon of Christ. We must make the other person aware that we love him. If we do, he will know that God loves him, and he will never hunger again." 2 weeks ago, Pastor Kay shared that God works through relationship and that the holy is lived out in relationship. Jesus was both relational and inclusive, as demonstrated by recorded conversations with Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman at the well. Nicodemus knew everything about the law, but didn't know Jesus, while the Samaritan woman only knew the judgment that she received from others for her lifestyle. They were unlikely neighbors for Jesus. A few years ago, I came across this quote by Cyril of Jerusalem, and I found this in a liturgy for ordinary radicals, which I highly recommend as a devotional. Orthodoxy, or right belief, plus orthopraxis, right living, must be married. Also, I'm sure you recognize these verses from James. Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. Both James and Cyril are saying that we need to both believe and act. Neighbors are everywhere. Our friends in Kenya that I just highlighted are purposefully reaching out to make new neighbors. But we also have neighbors already on our radar in our regularly traveled paths. Neighbors down the street, neighbors in our apartment buildings, folks we overlap with on the playground, sports parents, employees at our local businesses. We need to be intentional to see people regularly and to build relationship. And if there is nobody left to get to know, then perhaps we should expand our circles of contact. The first and greatest commandment is to love God with all we have, which is believing. And the second is to love our neighbor, which is to act. I want to address these in reverse order this morning. And I'm intentionally choosing examples of neighboring that aren't part of my daily teaching responsibilities, although I do intentionally serve my students. These photos, these next two photos, were taken about a half-mile walk from our house in our local shopping district. The student that's working on this project is, his passport country is Australia, and his parents serve in South Africa. For a couple of years, I had noticed a broken down bench being held together by plastic ties. This is in a really busy area of the local shopping district. So I asked a few of my local friends about it, and this bench ended up being the result. It was a community gift created by students and staff working together, and a staff member with a CNC machine to letter it. But it also helped build community within. I got to know that student, and I got to know the people that I worked with better. I learned that if you want to serve, it's important to understand if something is wanted. Don't make assumptions, and how it might be received. It's important to avoid a savior complex. In Kenya, that means working through the community leaders. Had to make sure they wanted the bench, or was I just assuming, well, because this bench is falling apart, that they must want a new bench. Maybe there's nothing wrong with the bench they have. So we had to work through the community leaders, check with the local chief, and find out if they wanted it, where they wanted it located. On a cross-cultural trip to Uganda once, I had a very eye-opening experience. The missionary that was hosting us suggested that we walk through the community. As we were going into the community we were going to hang out with that day, that we pick up trash along the way, and there was a lot of trash to choose from. So we did that, and then later on we found out that was perceived by the local community as not being good enough, that we were better than the community, and we needed to clean it up before we got there. And so that was certainly a big mistake and a big learning point. It's the relationship that's important, not so much what is being produced or given. My journey as a volunteer grew out of the emptiness that I experienced as I ran around in self-serving circles. As we seek to actively love our neighbors, I strongly encourage each of us to consider volunteering in the community and to love someone when it's not part of our job description. If you have a young family, serve together. It's a great way to model service to your kids. If you're unable to leave home, write personalized notes of encouragement to be delivered to folks who need to hear from you. There are always creative ways to serve. When you contact the church office, I got this from Pastor Kay, Pat is ready and she can help you with options and contact info. I'd also be happy to talk with you as well. This is one of my favorite slides, and actually, because this is where I buy my fruits and vegetables on a regular basis. And when I walk into, it's called the dukkha, when I walk into the veggie dukkha or shop, it's very important that I honor the women that I'm greeting. And so on the right, you can't see her, but Ruth is there on the right, and she's the youngest. And then there's Salome. And Salome's a little bit quiet and reserved, but her sister Jane is not quiet and reserved. I'll talk about her in a minute. And Martha, in the far back right corner, she and her family were relocated due to the election violence that Raj talked about, and they ended up in our community. Straight ahead is Florence. And Florence, her husband is a pastor in one of the local churches. To her left is Teresia. And I've known Teresia the longest, since 2001, actually, the year that we were dorm parenting and adopted Reed. And just this past year, Teresia's daughter passed away, probably from HIV and AIDS, but I'm not sure. And she now is caring for her 4 grandchildren. To her left is Mary, and I don't know her very well. Then there's Margaret, and she's one of my favorites, and she's probably the oldest woman there. She speaks very little English, so she just giggles all the time. And I have a better photo of Margaret in the next slide. Then there's Jane, and Jane is Salome's sister, and Jane is an entrepreneur, and she always says, "I've got good broccolis for you today. I have good broccolis." And then there's another Margaret that I don't know as well, and Zipporah. And Zipporah is like the accountant of the group. And she writes down, if I don't have enough small bills with me, then she keeps track of what everyone is owed, and then she totals everything up for me, so she's wonderful. And then this is Margaret, and the giggler. And then that's Sid on the right with the hat on, and a friend, Daniel. And one thing that Roger and I have tried to do, you can see those are the windows in the unit, in the cement block unit, and there's no glass. So we try to make sure that those remain covered with heavy plastic to help keep them warm, and as they're there during the day. And that's one way that we show them love and care, and that helps build relationship with them. When folks know they're loved, relationship flows freely. Steve Castle also talked about providing for the dignity of the folks that he serves daily at JIS. When possible, be a regular, not a drive-by. Get to know folks on their terms. Learn people's names and learn their stories if they want to be known. Our time offers dignity to folks. People need to know that they're more than a business transaction. As I walk home from visiting the Veggie Ladies, a woman approaches me. She's familiar, and I expect she will be asking for money, and she does. She continues talking, and I find myself thinking, I don't have time for this. I just spent my time with the ladies. 2 weeks ago, Pastor Kay asked, is it my right to pick and choose who my neighbor is? My neighbor is any human with needs. So I ask God to soften my heart, multiply my time, and continue to teach me what it means to be a neighbor. Listening to this woman may be the most important part of my day. I came across this Thomas Kelly quote a few years ago. Over the margins of life comes a whisper, a faint call, a premonition of richer living, which we know we are passing by. We have hints that there is a way of life vastly richer and deeper than all this hurried existence. A life of unhurried serenity and peace and power. If only we could slip over into that center. If only we could find the silence, which is the source of sound. In other words, We have this sense that God has more for us, more than just running around in my small circles, which sounds a lot like Paul's prayer for the Ephesians. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we may ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. God does have more for us, both outwardly as we act and inwardly in our belief. I'm convinced that God always has more to teach me and wants more of my heart, that I can know God more. These last two slides are images that I encounter regularly in my local community at Cure Children's Hospital and the main hospital, where unfortunately I've spent more time with Reed and Sid than I care to talk about this morning. This photo is on the wall at Cure. It's painted up high on the wall. And each Sunday morning, I walk down to Cure, at least pre-COVID, with student volunteers to do a Bible school of sorts. We pray and play with the children who are recovering from surgery. So I've seen this painting many times. This first grabbed my attention in 2014 when I wondered if I would have gotten into the boat with Jesus, not knowing what lay ahead. This was huge for me and eventually challenged me to take bold steps out of my controlled comfort zone and contributed to landing us in Kenya long term. Might Jesus be calling you to step into the boat? This last image is painted on the wall in the main hospital surgical hallway. I love the engaging tight grip that both Peter and Jesus have. In this story, Peter was stepping out of the boat to go to Jesus. No better place to be. As I wrestle with this powerful image, I find myself thinking, but I just got into the boat. Now what? I'm supposed to get out of the boat? What's with the boats, God? I sense Jesus calling me to move toward him in deeper relationship, to know him more, for my own sake and for the sake of those that I will serve. Might Jesus be calling you to step out of the boat? This last quote is from the book Experiencing God, which our church community group is studying. I think it's chapter 19 this afternoon. Is that right? There they are. Yep, chapter 19. You can't stay where you are and go with God. When God speaks to people about something God wants to do, they will need to realign or readjust their lives in some way. The disciples didn't stay where they were. Peter didn't stay where he was. They moved toward Jesus in both beliefs and actions. Whether our realignment has us getting into the boat or out of the boat, we must move toward Jesus. May God give us the strength to move in both our knowing God and loving neighbors. I think Roger's going to pray before we sing.
Father, thank you for the day again. And we just pray that this question of who's my neighbor can be answered for each one of us as we reach not just next door, but everywhere in between, down the street, the county, the state, the nation, and the world. Help us to go beyond our comfort zone, and that we can follow you more clearly. Amen.